Welcome to Mindset Mastery Moments, the podcast dedicated to helping you unlock your full potential through the power of mindset. Join Dr. Alisa Whyte, a transformative creator and multi-award-winning trailblazer, as she guides you on a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. With a background in corporate leadership and workforce development, Dr. Alisa has dedicated her career to inspiring individuals to achieve their goals and dreams. Known as the #1 mindset disruptor, she firmly believes that the key to success lies within the mind. Dr. Whyte has witnessed the incredible impact a shift in mindset can have on one's life, career, and relationships. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just beginning your journey of self-discovery, you'll find valuable lessons, inspiring stories, and practical tools to elevate your life. In each episode, Dr. Alisa engages with thought leaders, coaches, and changemakers from around the globe, exploring their journeys and the mindsets that have propelled them to success. Get ready to reframe your perspective, embrace challenges, and cultivate the mindset necessary to achieve your dreams. Now let's dive into today's episode and discover how to master your mindset for a brighter, more fulfilling future.
Hello, Disruptors, and welcome back to another exciting transformational episode of Mindset Mastery Moments for yours truly. Today, I have been waiting months for our recording schedule to be opened up for this phenomenal guest who is a professor, an LMFT therapist, and also a podcast host who specializes in empowering ambitious millennial women to boost their self-worth, confidence, and assertiveness. But I have a question for you. Did you know that according to a 2023 study, nearly 60% of women report that they struggle with self-confidence and assertiveness in both their personal and professional lives? Yeah, even I did for a little bit, and still a work in progress. Yet research also showed that those who cultivate these traits are more likely to achieve their goals, from healthier relationships to experiencing greater overall life satisfaction. And I'll tell you, this is why you must develop a mindset that's equipped with confidence and assertiveness. It's not just beneficial. I would say it's actually essential. So today we're going to dive deep into these topics and explore how you can transform your mindset to live a life overflowing with love, purpose, and abundance. We have the most amazing and beautiful, intelligent, brilliant guest who is trailblazing the transformation with women to uplevel them into a life filled with assertiveness and confidence. That is none other than Talia Bombola. Talia, we welcome you to Mindset Mastery Moments.
Thank you for having me. I'm over here beaming. That was a very, very impactful intro. Thank you very much.
Well deserved. As your work, as I delved into your work, it was just so exciting for me to see what you do, how you serve, and who you work with in this very crucial area. And you also specialize with women. But I want our viewers and listeners to know, while your work is focused, this is applicable. It's just that we niche in our work to ensure that we are giving the optimum of what we do. So Talia, in your own words, before you go in, I just have to get them just a little bit more about you for our listeners to understand that you have been working specifically with women as a coach, and you also speak, train. So tell us in your own words, what do you do so we can get a grasp of what we're looking forward to today?
Yes. I often joke that list of what don't I do is probably shorter, but I think things have shifted since becoming a parent. That definitely changes the priorities. When I'm in my professional life, however, I do work as a professor, I work as a therapist and a coach, like you mentioned, and I also have a few of my own podcasts. All of the work that I do is centered around, as you mentioned, empowering people, really, but like you said, the clients that I work with are mostly women, to understand who they are, and then from that base to like themselves, and then to have love for themselves, to have boundaries, to be able to stand up for themselves against other people, and to be able to set boundaries that actually create relationships and maintain relationships, many people think that boundaries are designed to either like control another person's behavior or to just cut everyone off. That's not the case at all. And that's where the intersection, I believe, of confidence and assertiveness comes in, that when you feel confident, you feel self-assured and you don't rely on external factors or external validation to make decisions. And the assertiveness piece is being able to stand up for yourself in a confident way without being aggressive. So it's the middle ground between being passive aggressive or aggressive. And often the clients I struggle with who struggle with confidence are more people pleasers, are more passive aggressive. They have these desires to have enriched relationships. However, they get in their own way by either their childhood conditioning or societal conditioning. Well, don't be too much of this, or that's not enough of that. And they're left feeling, even well into adulthood, like they don't know who they are, which obviously they would struggle with. Do I like myself? Do I love myself? How can I find a relationship? Where do I fit in my career? I can ask for a raise. I didn't even know that. Those core traits really do permeate all areas of your life. And so most of the therapists I know specialize, which I think is also very beneficial, with like survivors of childhood trauma or veterans or substance use, which are more like lifestyle specializations or niches. I wanted to specialize with personality traits specifically because, like you mentioned, that could be with kids. I've worked with a ton of kids, a ton of teenagers. I've worked with couples. I've worked with men and women. I've worked with systems. I've taught this in classes. So it helps anyone who's listening to cultivate the traits. So I think it brings more people in. And then the people who really want to dive in and do the deeper work, that is usually the ambitious women I work with, because I can relate, because I definitely was that person who thrived on external validation. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is fleeting. I need to find something more permanent and more within my control. And that's where those personality traits really came into play.
Wow. And that is phenomenal work that is so well needed as I navigate the terrain from, I mean, it doesn't matter which country or city or state.
Exactly.
Talking to someone in, it's like when someone said, I didn't know I can ask for a raise. I work with, especially with most of my days are spent working with individuals who are looking for work and either starting a new career or go through, whether they're a retiring firefighter, an accountant who just doesn't want to do accounting anymore, or someone who's now starting their career, coming out of college to moving into construction industry, whichever way. And we talk about negotiations, and I said this word can be really scary because you should see it. I was like, what do you mean? We negotiate at the interview? I'm like, yeah, they put a number on those job orders, and that is just because that's their write-off. Yeah. You have to know what your budget is, and then you have to ask for it because they will just give you what they want.
Yeah.
And they're like,
you accept it.
How do I do that? And you tell them, oh my God, I don't know how I can do that. And so we go over these exercises, and that again would come from number one, the assertiveness, and then the confidence to move forward. So let's just dive into your expertise. I'm excited because you are all my stuff, all my jam. I don't know it the way you do, but that is exactly why you're here to teach us. So in your work, you definitely, of course, talk about the confidence factor and the assertiveness factor as more than just behaviors. You focus them on like a mindset. They really are a way of thinking, being, and doing. So can you explain exactly what you mean? Would you give us a little hint already? What you mean when you say that mindset of confidence and assertiveness?
Yes. So the way that I like to frame it is coming from the baseline understanding of self-worth and self-esteem, I believe are necessary before, like to understand it before we dive into confidence and assertiveness, because it all connects. So when you're looking at understanding what self-worth is, it's believing that you have inherent worth and value without the need. That doesn't mean you don't like, but you don't need it to come from somebody else or an external source. It's an intrinsic, from within sense of knowing I am worthy, not fill in the blank because I've done this or when I've done this. It's I'm worthy, period. Now, you could feel a sense of self-worth externally, usually when you're deriving it, if you have a certain title or if you have a certain relationship, it could boost that. But I don't recommend that being the source of self-worth because it's also like antithetical. It has to come from the self of its self-worth. Other than that, it's like other-based worth. And when those aren't there, who are you? That's usually the question that I have people understand as a foundational question to be able to have that confidence and assertiveness feel real and feel authentic, both for yourself and the person receiving it from you. I believe that having that sense of self-worth, intrinsic value that I am enough, makes the difference. It doesn't mean that you can't practice, right? You're saying the behaviors of somebody who's confident and assertive before you feel that sense of self-worth. The ultimate, right, the pinnacle that I work with clients to reach is that they feel that sense of self-worth, they have a high esteem for themselves, and that's the other people can have a high regard for them. Again, self-esteem has to come from the self, from within. So having high self-worth, having a high esteem for yourself allows the confidence and assertiveness to feel genuine, to feel authentic, and the behavior then flows through you, and it's part of who you are. You don't question it. And if others question you, it's not the aggressive self-defense. Well, how could you say that? It's like, interesting. Could you share with me how you experienced me to let you believe I was fill in the blank, whatever it was, a different way? And knowing who you are allows you to not come off as defensive. It allows you to come off as self-assured. And that's where a lot of the clients I work with feel very self-protective when they're, I call it mischaracterized. Somebody experiences them in a way they didn't want to be experienced. They're coming off in a way that in their brain they had the perfect assertive thing to say, but then it comes off super passive. And they're like, well, I don't know why people walk all over me. I say, let's be real with what your experiences are. Bring it in the room, and they'll cite examples of being more passive aggressive. And I said, I see the disconnect. Here's how you want to be experienced, but there's a fear inside of you, maybe that you're not good enough, that they'll leave you if you say the wrong thing. All very valid. Let's work through that so that's not leading your behavior. Instead, that's you're processing it maybe in therapy or coaching, and then out in the world, you can be your most confident, assertive self.
Oh, I love those definitions. And that works exactly. Just because I have that little nerd in me and I love to play around in your field of therapy. And I use a lot of modalities in my coaching that comes from therapy. What I found is that as young children, we're very confident and assertive because I like to get to the root cause.
Me too.
Right. So as I worked with young children a lot in my career. If I was not working directly with them, I was managing and training educators that were. And so what I found with young children is that they're like, that's mine. I don't like that. That confidence is just always there. How do we lose that? What kind of events or things causes us as humans to lose that confidence and assertiveness that is naturally ingrained in us as children?
So for the answer to this, I think the best person, well, one of the best people to cite would be a man named Erik Erikson. He founded he founded the theory of psychosocial development. So when you're looking at the way, and of course, because the world has advanced since this theory was created and we see different life milestones, it won't necessarily exactly apply for the starting around adolescence, and now we have what's called emerging adulthood. That wasn't included in his theory because lifespan wasn't as long. But I believe, and I'm trained in infant, child, and adolescent psychoanalysis. So I'm obsessed with learning, as if it's not evident already.
It is.
When we're looking at the psychosocial development, there's milestones that ideally human beings, starting from infancy and beyond, reach. And this is where this ego identity comes from. So it's this conscious sense of self that we develop throughout social interactions that either go well or go poorly. So the ego identity is constantly changing. It's not necessarily your one way and that's the way that you stay. It doesn't crystallize at a certain age in your younger years. And you gather information through the interactions that you have, whether that's with your parents, grandparents, any primary caregivers, school, coaches, other of your friends' parents. So you're gathering all this data constantly as you're getting older. And it doesn't just come from the people who are raising you. It comes from when the people who are raising you allow you to, go to a certain school. What is that school teaching you? Or join a certain sport. What is that sport teaching you? So it also helps you, if you're going through the milestones, develop a sense of confidence in yourself and motivate certain behaviors and actions. So when we're taking a look at all of these different stages, there's an ideal that we go through. And then there is sometimes, if we're not able to resolve what our task is at that stage, a conflict. And so when we're looking at the first few stages in infancy, and this all answers this, we're going way down into it.
I love it.
When we're looking at the infant stages and how infants build their sense of self is in relation to the parent, usually the mother. In all the analytic papers, we use mother. I'm aware that family systems have shifted now, and it's not always a mother and father household. So
yes.
I'm just giving that caveat
We're
when I
doing
say that.
Because,
Yes,
because
that's the language of the
how they're
paper.
studying. Yeah. Right, exactly.
That's the research. So the child, that's why they call it the fourth trimester. The child doesn't know they're separate from the mother for at least the first 3 months. And this goes back to anthropology. If women's bodies could actually carry a baby until the baby was actually ready to be safely birthed, pregnancy would last anywhere from like 1.5 to 2 years potentially. Having been pregnant, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. I think you all are like 6 months. I have not gone that far in pregnancy, but I think most women are like 6 months. Can you?
I'm out. It was not pleasant because we're bipedal. We walk on our feet and our hips can only go so wide. Babies are born before they're ready. They can't hold their neck up without us. They can't really see that well. So that fourth trimester, so first few months out of the womb, they don't know they're separate from us, and they need to be close to us. They need to be near us because the way they filter the world is, I am still my mother. I am still close to mother, especially. So this is
because she's the one who carried them.
Yeah, whether you do adoption, whether you do surrogacy, like that's where obviously we can get very nuanced into that. But it's so important for the child, the infant, to be close to the mother because that's how they view the world. So as they're moving through infancy into like toddlerhood and beyond, this is where we can bring back Erickson. When we're looking for trust versus mistrust, that's that first psychosocial stage. This is from birth till about 12 to 15 months, depending on which chart of the theory you're looking at. So usually we round it to like birth between 1 year of age. It's the most fundamental stage in life. And many people will say, well, it's just, they're just a kid. That always grinds my gears because I'm like, no, like arguably the most focused you should ever be on a person is from like 0 to 5. Then you can let your foot off the gas. Don't they're just a baby. Like, oh, you're just forming their entire way they're going to view the world. Like, no worries. So you want them to develop trust. You want to attune to their needs, and attunement and being able to have your caregiver perceive your cries. Every mammal is born with the instinct to survive. So most animals are born knowing how to walk. And if they needed to run away from prey or predator, they could, because usually they're prey. Human babies are born knowing how to cry because the parent ideally learns to attune to the child and decipher that cry means diaper, that cry means food, this cry means they've had all their needs met. They just need that closeness. And if you didn't have that closeness from your own childhood, let's say your parents were not attuned to you or not present with multiple generations before, maybe they passed away in war, they weren't, for whatever reason, they weren't present. How could we expect a parent to attune to a child if their own dependency needs weren't met when they were an infant? You have an infant, it brings up all your own childhood stuff that was either healed or unhealed. So that core foundation of how children develop, can I trust others? Can I trust other people in the world? Starts when they're literally an infant and goes through life. And so ideally they develop trust. If they don't, and it's not successful that they develop trust, they could feel that people are emotionally unavailable, that they're rejected, and they can contribute, that feeling can be compounded rather as they grow up. So they can result in fear and a belief that the world is inconsistent and unpredictable, which is similar to, when we bring in attachment theory, more of an anxious attachment or an avoidant or disorganized attachment. The very people who were supposed to keep me safe either weren't attuned regularly enough for me to trust. So I either learned to be frantic and try to get my needs met, more anxious, rely on myself entirely, avoidant, or kind of a scoop of both, which is, that's usually in cases of more severe abuse or severe neglect, childhood emotional neglect. Again, the very people who were supposed to keep me safe were the ones hurting me. How could we expect a person to go through the world and develop healthy no matter the kind of relationships, if that core foundation for what relationships are supposed to be was so jarring. So this is where like I will die on this hill that it's so important to understand.
That's the soapbox for me.
Yes, that's the soapbox. So you want to through trust. Obviously, therapy can help go back and repair. It can never undo what's been done, but it can help you to frame and repair for yourself as much as you're able to. Right. So we move through the first stage into the second stage. This is where autonomy versus shame and doubt is the task. Do I feel like I'm an independent self that can also trust my primary caregivers? Right. Or do I feel usurped in my power and then I feel ashamed of myself or I doubt my abilities? So this includes the stages gaining more control over like food choices, toy preferences, clothing selections, because this goes from about a year old till about 2 to 3 years, again, depending on what chart you're looking at. So you want them to feel a sense of control, not feeling out of control, because that's where you see these more like an analysis like anal retentive tendencies, where it's like, no, it has to be this way. My food can't touch because they feel so out of control. They try to control the very little amount you're giving them that they can't. So you want them to be autonomous. You don't want them to feel a sense of shame or doubt or inadequacy. When they move through this and they do not have the self-doubt, they have the autonomy, the next stage they will go through is initiative versus guilt. Ideally, they feel competent, they feel capable, they're able to lead other people. These are the little kids in the classrooms like, I'll be the leader or you guys can follow me. And they feel like they're a person separate from other people around them. However, they feel they can still rely on grown-ups around them
to get support.
Exactly. So those who at this stage fail to acquire these skills are left with that sense of, again, guilt, self-doubt, or lack of initiative. And they feel like nothing they ever do is good enough. Why bother trying? So and so, Johnny's a better leader than me. Why would I even try? During the preschool years, when this happens, children assert their power and control over the world. Have you ever met a toddler? They're very narcissistic. And I'm using that term specifically because their ego self is like, I'm all that matters. And they're a child. So really, they're right. Like
infants are like that. Infants are narcissistic.
Yes. And everyone has, this is where like self-psychology comes into play. Everyone has narcissistic traits. Yes. It's whether they're healthy or not, and after they're integrated or not in adulthood. So we all have it. We all have a sense of self-importance. We all have a sense of who we are and what we ought to receive or not receive, what we deserve or we don't.
And that is normal. Yes. We hope that everyone does that. If someone is not that way, we're concerned about them.
Yes. If they're always feeling put in the one down position or that they aren't worth anything or not deserving of anything, they likely didn't integrate that narcissistic part in their childhood that maybe a parent shamed it out of them, or a parent actually had the personality disorder, which is more rare than society likes to say. You can have traits of something without having the full-blown disorder or diagnosis.
Exactly.
And that's a really important distinction to make, because when this pushes against a parent's sense of maybe they felt out of control, they're a control freak. That's not a diagnosis, but I'm putting that in quotes.
Yes, the word
they identify as type A. They like things just so. They don't like things being out of order. Usually they grew up either in a household where that kept them safe if they behaved that way, or they grew up in a household that was so chaotic. They had to develop a type A personality to feel some semblance of, like we said, that autonomy and that initiative. And when you're experiencing the very joyous but messy, chaotic experience that toddlerhood years bring, it pushes on a lot of your controlling parts. You're not going to be on time to places. You're not going to look presentable all the time. Children do not comply with what you want simply because you're the grown-up. And so many parents like, I'll never be like my parents. And then I'm working with them in like, parent-child therapy. And they're like, the kid throws something and like, that's not what we do. And I'm like, no, that's not what you do. That's what your child does, because do you want them to eventually as an adult be a separate self? You have to learn to tolerate it now. And this is where the foundation, again, to go very deep, this is where the foundation, in my view, of confidence and assertiveness are developed. Letting your child trust you, encouraging their autonomy, encouraging their initiative within the realm of safety, right? If they're like, I think I can jump off a building, obviously fantasy and reality need to be taught. And like, they need to internalize that. And you can be like, okay,
it's not real, sweetheart.
Right. Like we don't have wings, but how else can you feel empowered? Do you want to jump off the diving board into the pool? Right. Like there's ways to redirect the energy. Right. And then when we're looking after the preschool years into like early years so about 5 to 11 is what this next stage is. this is where through the social interactions, we have industry versus inferiority. Do I develop a sense of pride in my accomplishments and abilities? I bring my drawings home to show my parents. And my favorite line is when the parents are like, oh, this looks nice. Are you proud of yourself? And this is a very contentious school of thought in parenting.
And so it's mine as well.
Yes,
to tell that way for me for about 10 years.
To tell your parent, like, have your parent tell you, I'm so proud of you, and also encourage, how do you feel about
it? What
do you like about this? Mom, I like this color that you chose here. That's an awesome color. Right. What do you like? That blends both schools of thought, where the child should be proud of themselves and the parent should also be proud of the child. If we're too much in the camp of let the kid figure it out for themselves, they're 5. They don't have the frontal lobe development to do what you're trying to explain to them. They need to hear from you in a sense, not overly indulgent, but they need to hear from you that you have worth, you have value, I'm proud of you, mom and dad love you. So giving that encouragement is different than being like encouraging like entitlement or coddling, where it's like no matter what they do, it's the best thing they've ever done. It's like, there has to be a range.
Beautiful. I love it. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to put it here. These are the traditional responses that when, a lot of parents were not giving their child attention, they would just be like, oh, okay, good. Yeah. And then it became the overly. And so I just said this to my class and because it's funny, all of this, when you're doing workforce development and getting people to transition into a new career or something, you work through it. And I was sharing with my students that when you are as a child, when you are told everything was beautiful, and then you grow up and realize there's a real world out there that says, what the heck is that? That's dumb. You don't know what to do with it. So I was saying to them, this is why as parents, you too would want to be, when a child draws a photo, not lie to them, because they would get a box of crayon and they're just scratching everywhere. And they're like, Mommy, look at my truck. You're like, oh my God, that's a beautiful truck. Don't not lie to that child. You don't have to, and it doesn't help them either way. This is your response. Oh, you drew a truck. Tell me about it.
Yes. Show the interest. The facial, the tone and the facial expression can convey the approval or the attention, right? And attention, I think in parenting, the better way to put it is like connection. The child seeking connection. And attention has a bad rap, obviously, in like the psychology field for some of it. It's like, oh, there's attention seeking. It's like, well, what if we called them connection seeking and realized all humans
are connection seeking.
Yes, everyone is. And that's why if we look at the studies from like the solitary confinement in prison, and even prison are so psychologically damaging because human beings feel starved off of what keeps them alive, unless they have some sort of,
and it's almost like I say, we're almost creating more seasoned criminals. But anyway, that's
we could do a whole other episode on that. So that feeling of industry, when parents and teachers and coaches encourage that sense of confidence and trying again, right? That wasn't, what do you feel like when they ask you, like, was that good? It's like, I mean, I think it was pretty good. How do you think it was? Do you want to try again? What level of skill do you want? What would you say is like the best hit that you could do, let's say in a sport? And they're like, well, I liked how so-and-so did that. Okay. And what you just did, from there, like, what's the gap? And obviously, when they're older, they can understand this more. It's like a 5-year-old necessarily, but you want to encourage them.
Teaching them how to think.
Yes, they borrow. My view of parenting and like just being an adult around kids is that you let them borrow from your frontal lobe until theirs is fully developed. So you model the critical thinking skills for them, because eventually parents are obsolete. Whether that's the child autonomizes, they go off. We obviously pass away. As far as I know, all of us are mortal in some ways. Like I would I would like children to understand. Oh, this is how I was taught to think about this. So the child knows how to think when the parent isn't present. If the child only knows critical thinking skills when they're relying on the parent, and they don't know how to do that when they're stuck in a situation as a teenager where they're like, well, this person, I don't drink, but this person that was supposed to drive me home is, what do I do? Obviously, I want my child to be able to call me, but I also want them to think, no, I know that's wrong. And I think internalizing the message of, and my parents taught me this, what's right isn't always popular, and what's popular isn't always right.
Always right. Oh, I love that.
And being able to understand that's even if you're going against the grain, this is where confidence and assertiveness comes into play.
Yeah.
My peers might not like me for this, but will I live?
Exactly. How much
Yeah.
I say we have to teach our children how to think.
Yes.
And so what I find myself, and this is why as a younger, when I got my first degree was in early childhood education in Ghana, South America, which was more, it's funny because I studied child development here, studied early childhood education. It seems like I studied more child development. It was the reverse somehow. And that's where I studied all of this. Like you're going through it and I'm like, oh, my mom, because my mom is in early childhood education educator as well. And she's going to love your episode going through those phases, but teaching them how to think. And so what I find myself when I work with adults, I'm actually doing what was not done with them as a child.
Reparenting. Yep, exactly.
And at first, I think I didn't understand. That's why it was so much easier when I thought about it. I was so clear once I did my first few college classes in early childhood that when I learned Erickson's theory and even Freudian theory, it was like, okay, my best bet to really help and serve the world and create change is going to be to focus on young children. And so a lot of my colleagues in the coaching and speaking industry, I'm like, I feel like a lot of us are targeting, C-suite executives. We're targeting, and that's wonderful. They got money to pay us, but let's think about moving over our work and bringing some of this specifically for youth as often as we can. And they might not pay you, but you will literally changing the world one little mindset at a time. Go as young as you can tolerate. Like, I can't do it with kids. Well, you guys are missing out. I thought I was more first grade, maybe kinder to maybe third grade teacher after teaching all grades from even remedial. And once I had to encounter being in a 2-year-old classroom because I didn't have a staff. And I was like, oh my goodness. I hung out there for 4 years of my career. Best time to apply every psychological principle.
So true.
Try and test my theories. I was in college as well. And it was and I'm looking at these young people now, they're in their 20s and they're graduating college and all this stuff. And it's like looking at where they've become, because I even learned to develop partnership with the parents. So right now we're working on a project for that, for specifically Zambia. And it's like, okay, I understood why I did that, because now I'm going to do this on this large scale for a whole other country that does not have these systems. And by the way, I'm going to have you included.
I'm in. Yeah. Let me know how I can help.
This is everything that changes everything for us. And so let's go to the point where a lot of our viewers and listeners are like, this is why I messed up. And I'm like, using other words.
Yeah. When I taught this class, it was probably the first year they changed the title to some district change, but I would always joke with the students, and I'm like, so this class is called unofficially How Your Parents Messed You Up Before Age 8. I am a parent, like I'm not parent shaming when I say this. You don't know what you don't know. And how could you give what you've never received? So it's not intentional. Some parents, I mean, that's on the fringe that they intentionally do this, but some parents are they just don't know. They don't have the right education on what to do or not do. They're only going based on, I don't want to repeat the things I know I didn't like from my parents, but the subconscious mind can't process no or don't. So if I'm only focused on not doing this, my brain goes, do it. And then we're frustrated. I'm trying to not yell, but every time I'm like, have you learned what to do instead? What behaviors and thoughts and mindset work are you doing to replace what you do not like? That's the missing link for so many people, is they're sitting here prime, like head in their hands, like, oh my gosh, this all stems from childhood. That's actually good news. You actually have an identified source for where you can heal from now. Go to therapy, go to coaching. Usually the deeper childhood stuff, I would recommend obviously doing it in therapy. Once you feel the solid foundation. Coaching is wonderful. I think it could be a great addition at the same time that you're in therapy too. Why not?
You can actually either go into your therapy for about 3 months and then add a coach based on the conversation with your therapist. It's absolutely advised, because the roles are different. This is why I know you do both.
Yes.
And I love that we have more therapists who are stepping into the coaching space where they can do both, because it's sort of different. The uproot and bring forward and heal, and then now the coaching for me is the replace to pull you forward.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes, I agree.
So what would you say? I mean, you just did. I was thinking about it, but let's talk to that parent. If there are a couple things you can say to them right now, just switch to start to encourage that level of assertiveness based on the theories we just went over. What are like 4 or 5 things that they can absolutely start doing right now?
Yeah.
Or set a habit of practicing with their child, especially if they have the young children. And I would say even if you have teenagers.
Oh, even more.
Yeah. What would you do?
Yeah, I would say on a foundational level, look, and it's hard, and this is where be in your own therapy, please, parents. Like raising a child has you face all the ways that you either were or weren't raised the way you would have liked to be. So please have your own counsel, so you're not as much as you possibly can be aware of, which I know projection is a subconscious defense, but the more you're aware of it, the more even after you can be like, oh, that was totally me projecting. Like you can catch yourself on it. Have somebody who can help you to separate your own childhood stuff from your kid's childhood, because it's not fair to them. So that would be the number one thing to recommend, that you can start as soon as you can find a therapist that you like, and then look through the world through the eyes of a child. And the reason why I say go to therapy first, because sometimes if you don't have your own containment, you can't look through the world as the eyes of a child and the level of attachment and attunement. And I imagine, and it's, some people have said, like when I've done this on interviews, they're like, well, isn't that a little codependent if you're thinking of like, it's not the I'm happy if you're happy. It's not saying that like I'm going to not do things just because of that. It's looking and going, oh, well, I've changed their diaper and I've done all this, and put yourself in their shoes for a moment of like, they probably just need to be held. Let me give it a try. Doing that and then finding that it works develops your confidence as a parent. It also teaches your child, oh, I can go to the person, they'll meet my needs. And that the holding, being held looks different at different ages. It looks like being able to advocate for them to a teacher that they're struggling with, but also drafting a note to them or a friend. Let's teach you the words to stand up to your friends, and not just like encourage whatever it might be, like telling them off, but let's be assertive. And I'm going to have you do it. If you need mom or dad to tag in, then you come get us. We can also tell your teacher, or do you want to tell your teacher? It's giving them the ideas they may not have or feel comfortable enough to advocate for themselves for, and then encouraging them to in fact do that. And then you are there as, depending on the issue, obviously, the last line of defense. You will get involved, you will advocate, you will use your voice, but what a better gift to give your kids to teach them to find their own voice and how to use it.
And how to use it.
So those are some foundational things that kids and parents, like families, can start using today. And if you're listening to this as, even if you are not a parent, but you're an adult reparenting your inner child, finding your own voice is the key to success in almost every area of your life. And that's where that, in the beginning of what we were talking about, finding out who you are, not who the world told you to be, not who the world said you weren't, but you knew you were. Who are you, and can you discover that person, feel confident in that person, and start living a life based on that
place, which would be that authenticity, which is, and I just did we started the second season, which this episode will be in with, I did just a short 30-minute on connecting with your true values and understanding that there's a difference between morals and values, and morals are more of what societal norms are. It's more of what your parents would have thought. And so what you're telling us in this episode is that we actually need to empower our children, or I would say anyone that you're pairing, or as you I love that you reverted to your own inner child, nurture yourself with the fact of, this is who I am, and this is who my parents are, what my family believes and all that, but this is who I am. And I really, really like and love who I am. And I respect and I enjoy your perspective and your views of the world, but here's the path that's right.
Here's what's true for me.
Not true. And I like true better than right. I think the words right and wrong, it doesn't leave room for anybody, for us as individuals.
Yeah, and there's a whole, we could talk about like a whole, whatever, existential or ontological debate about morality versus values. So when I teach the later part of like Erickson's stages, when we're looking at like meaning and loss towards the end of our life, we don't have to wait to find out our core values till then. That's a different lesson too. But when we're looking at right versus wrong or morality versus values, the way I teach it is kind of, I draw it on a whiteboard like a DNA strand, and I put one level as your parents and one level as you, and then people can start to see generationally. Like I get really, artistic with it. Yeah. And I said, your morals are what your parents gave to you of like what is right and what is wrong. Yeah. And of course it's our job, right? It's our part of our role, I think, as a competent parent to teach right versus wrong. And what you take from that at your generational level becomes what you value. Obviously you have a sense of morality, but you have values. Then when you teach your kids your values, it becomes their morals, right? And then it's this lockstep system all the way down. Yeah. So when you're looking at what is right versus wrong, let's say your parents came from a generation where you weren't allowed to have premarital sex for whatever the reasoning was, whether it was religious, whether it was fear-based, that was the lesson. So maybe you won't follow that exactly, but what you took from that and your intrinsic value is, I'm going to be in a relationship that I feel loved and respected and valued, and there's a commitment before I choose to do that, right? Exactly. Similar, right? So it still feels right for you.
But the value is different.
So that's where you can start to take from what your parents taught you or what you learned growing up. And this is where I'm a big fan of Carl Jung. So he first popularized the phrase like the two halves of life. You spend the first half building your sense of identity, importance, hopefully a sense of maturity, what he would call kind of the false self, or Freud calls the ego self. It's not your real self yet. It's just there's a value, or there's an ego structure there that's valuable to have, but inevitably you usually through loss or failure discover like that conscious self is not all you. It's like the acceptable version of you that was allowed in society. And you find your real purpose and identity at a much deeper level than just that image. That's where your second half of life, and we're not saying ages specifically, this is just like the day that you realize this isn't who I am and I need to go find it, that's your second half.
That's your second half.
The ego has a place, but now what you're doing is in service of your true authentic self, your soul, that inner integrity, that inner identity and knowing, and that the ego is the container that holds you all together. But when you're a grounded person and you've gone in and done the work, you can flex that container off. So you have this experience of, I don't need that protective shell as much anymore. We also have an ego, but now you know your integrated authentic self. So you spend the rest of your life, the second half, rest of your life, being who you really are, unburdened by who you were told to be or not.
To be or expected to be. And that's a beautiful, beautiful place to be. We want to, every person can possible. And I feel like you just summarized why I do what I do for the podcast or anything, paycheck or not. That is my life's mission, because the sooner the better. Yes. And with this type of parenting that you taught us on at the beginning of this episode, that's exactly what that leads to. I feel like it leads to an earlier release of the ego protection. Or more of I would say a better combo in your earlier parts of your life. Yeah. So stepping into the space where you're literally connected to your purpose. And I was just having a conversation with one of my dear friends from Sweden, and we were talking about the 4 levels of consciousness. It was a little bit different, from the psychological theories. I don't know if they've blended enough yet, but we're talking about first level where it's, survival mode, where you're just like, got to make sure I got it. And second level, it's where, okay, I need to have all these things, and also still a lot of people please and everything. Then third dimension is like, oh, I'm just in like flow. Yes. I am sure, I'm confident that everything and all things that have occurred in my life that's occurring right now are working for my highest good. I need to flow with it, but I'm clear. I know why I'm here. I know what I'm supposed to do. So it's like, it's all the same thing. And I love Carl as well. He's been a big part of my in it. And the thing is I started studying human development at age 17. And so when I'm able to sit and curate these conversations, it shouldn't surprise anyone. I'm a big nerd. I was reading instead of reading romance novels or comic books, which I love both, I found the psychology book, and then
Same.
it was on from there.
Yep,
And
same.
so I'm like,
Yeah.
it's so important. So when we talk about humanity, this is the conversation. This is why I created Mindset Mastery 360, the global movement, because I feel like I've worked on so many task forces, and I'm a part of so many boards where they're doing we do amazing work in really putting together maybe entrepreneurial platforms for young people to learn and develop, and, women initiatives and all that. I'm like, okay, no one has done this, but they do realize that the work would be a lot easier in those initiatives if we just help people understand and connect with themselves and their purpose and be in an authentic space of, this is who I am, and unapologetically show up that, and love what you said. And we're going to jump into that a little bit. You said it doesn't mean you have to be aggressive or demeaning or whatever. Also in your work, Talia, you talk about having the courage to be disliked.
Yeah.
And this is that second tier of once you've done the work, you've gone through probably therapy, because, hey, I'm going to tell y'all guys, I feel like we all absolutely, no matter how perfect you think your life is, unless you figure this out on your own already and you've already had, because there's a lot of us who that kind of what we stepped into. But then I needed some help with having a therapist and coaching to work through. And it's an ongoing process, because once it wasn't understood by your parents, they did what they did. And they did. I am one. And my father passed away, God rest his soul. I was not being beaten or scolded for something I did, but being whatever path and journey he had, I got injured in the head because of his wrath and anger, and suffered a head injury, memory loss, all that stuff. People are like, how did you forgive, right? And I'm like, you know what? Yeah. With all the study I just told you all about, I understood that my parents were only doing the best that they could. I also was the child who was inquisitive about my ancestry in their parenting and their parents as much as I could get. And all I saw, it was people who were trying to survive and maintain. It got higher levels, but
as
it was
the generations went, but
So with my father, whatever he did and how he acted, that's on him. I have to release that in order to connect with me and who I am and where I'm going. But that was I tell people that was too easy. I say too easy, meaning that's a no-brainer, because I am focused on becoming my best self. And that sounds so cliche. But the point I want to say, the courage to dislike, could you elaborate how embracing that mindset? And I'm going to say this, and I don't want anyone to be offensive, but I want to say women, I want you to talk to all of us as humans and specify women, because there's a little bit of a difference there.
Yes.
To overcome those feelings of inadequacy and really assert themselves more effectively.
Yeah. So where to begin? So The Courage to Be Disliked is one of my favorite books. The author also wrote The Courage to Be Happy, both of which, if you have not read them, listeners,
you should.
Pause this, go read them, and come back, and then press play. The author, it's a interesting style of book as well, because it goes from a philosopher to a student, and they kind of specify the age as like a younger boy, but you could project onto it whatever you'd like. So the courage to be disliked comes from understanding not everyone's going to like you, not everyone's going to love you, and not everybody might even respect you, because that's usually the classic line of like, you don't have to like me, but you have to respect me. How antiquated parenting informed that. You can't control another person. Sometimes you can't even influence another person. For some in your inner circle, you do have a higher chance of influence.
Because the connection,
it's not a guarantee. Exactly. Yeah. It's not a guarantee. So the courage to be disliked comes from doing, in my translation, going inward, doing your parts work, doing your shadow work, understanding the parts of your psyche that are yours to integrate. That's becoming a person of integrity, having all those parts integrated, and understanding that there might be even parts of yourself that you don't like, but you could go in and accept them and tolerate, which means to interact with and still have respect for. Many people conflate that with putting up with. Putting up with is the feeling of like, ugh, like what most people say, I'm tolerating it. Like tolerating is actually respectful. It's like deference. So we need to change the linguistics that we're using, that having tolerance for the parts of ourselves that we don't necessarily love or we don't really like. What you own about yourself, another person can't use against you. So doing my own inner work, I've discovered, aside from having diagnosed ADHD later in college, part of the traits of having that as like kind of my psyche structure, I'm impatient and I get really irritated. And it doesn't come from a place of entitlement, because I know the difference. When I'm on my meds for ADHD, I don't get bothered by whatever I usually would. The impatience thing, that's where you can kind of guess, is it like coming from entitlement or coming from something that's neurodivergent? Is like when you're properly medicated and using your coping skills, does it still trigger you? Maybe yes, maybe no.
It does, but it doesn't have the same effect.
Exactly. It's not going to last with me. I can be like, whew, didn't love that, and move on about my day. So there's traits like I'm judgmental, which I describe as discerning. I think everybody would benefit from being more judgmental by that definition. Does this fit for me? Does this not? It's not this overwhelming, all encompassing, all accepting. It's more discerning. I know I can be, but yeah, I think impatient and judgmental are really the ones that still linger. And I think doing the inner work and understanding those parts about myself, or abrasive is another one, because though I am the confidence and assertiveness specialist, it came from somewhere. I've had seasons of my life where I was, without knowing, more passive aggressive because I had to learn what I teach my clients. And I've had seasons of life where I was more aggressive because I didn't have a voice yet for how to language what I was so passionate about, or when I felt mischaracterized. Sometimes that overwhelming sense of self-protection comes off as being more aggressive, and learning, like all of that coming together, learning to have the courage to be disliked. Not only if somebody called those traits out of me would I be like, okay, and like neutral, like what else do you got? That which really takes the wind out of their sails. It's understanding when they're experiencing me that way. It's like, okay, what about that interaction?
Yes.
I go inward. What about that interaction brought out that part of myself that I know I'm working on, that I know I'm capable of being? Every human is capable of being aggressive. It's just the environment that either elicits it or inhibits it. So when you go in and do the inner work, you now have the courage to be disliked by others, but also to understand there might be parts of yourself you don't like currently that you can learn to tolerate. So who do you want to be experienced as? How do you want to be experienced is a guiding question all of us could be asking ourselves on a moment to moment or day to day basis, interaction to interaction basis, really. So the courage to be disliked comes from more of that like Adlerian concept of therapy or of psychology, that there are versions of yourself. There are parts of yourself that when you work to integrate, you can have that liking and that inner knowing and not be reliant on external validation. And you can have general regard and respect for yourself and your place in the world and those around you, and understand that your influence is limited. And how can you tolerate when you bump up against somebody else who doesn't want to comply with what you want or doesn't align with your right morals or values or beliefs? How can you interact in a kind way that's tolerant, but doesn't necessarily further a relationship or doesn't further you not liking yourself? And so your question about how does this translate with women specifically, when we are growing up, hormones have a whole lot to do, pretty much everything to do with why we behave the way that we behave. And you can see this because teenagers, when they are going through their preteens, teenagers, menopause, anything where hormonal shifts happen, people don't quite feel like, look like, or act like themselves, who they know their selves to be. So when they're going from this sweet little compliant child, and boys and girls are different in their stages of development, but when they're going from this sweet compliant, I'll do anything you want, to like, I have a sense of self, I want to do these things, and now hormones are acting on them. We can't beat biology in that way, because we are hardwired as like a human species to evolve and to further the species. That's why we actually have to like teach safe sex. You don't have to teach sex, like people know how to do it because it creates for the population, but you have to go in and be like, this is how you prevent this and this and that. And that education has to be there, that when you're looking at the hormones, the split before about age 12 to 13, I'd have to do some more current research of the ages if it's changed, but about that age,
Right.
Boys and girls have about a 1-to-1 incidence of rates of depression. It's around after 12 that we see it 2-to-1 for girls because of the way estrogen, progesterone, and our testosterone shifts during adolescence. We go more negatively inward, compare ourselves to other people. Why am I doing this? Who likes me? Who this? Where we don't see that same. People want to be liked, right, as a person, but we don't see the same concern usually in boys going through adolescence. They're like all about fun and adventure. They're all about like wanting to go carve out where their place in the world is. Yes. I imagine them like a knight on a hobby horse, like gallivanting, throughout the world.
That imagery. Yeah,
that's the image. And then they maybe eventually get like the metal sheath or whatever, and they have like their real horse in their 20s, but it's like that they're worried about something else. They're worried about fun and adventure. What part of the world is mine? And this is where we miss out on a lot.
Taking territory.
Yeah, right. From tribal cultures where they would have these rites of passage, they would become a man. We're missing that in a lot of Western culture, to be honest. There's no transition period of like a boy to a man to where.
And so they don't even know what's happening because no one talks about it. I mean, let's face it.
Yeah.
Most people, this is going to be the first time they're even hearing.
They're hearing, yes. And so for girls, because we're not only like, there's at least two schools of thought. It's like the nature versus nurture. Is this societal or is this intrinsically led? Do I want to, find a person, have a child, have a family? That's one option, but that's not the only option. Now we have an option to have a career before or instead of, having a family. So when you're looking at not only the hormonal shifts that are happening, where do I fit in society? Who likes me? Yes. And we define ourselves more socially because way back in like hunter-gatherer days, we stayed around and we learned to communicate, like, don't eat that berry, do this instead. We were the verbal ones. And then we get frustrated now in adult relationships that men aren't the verbal ones. If they spoke when they were hunting, they would die. So that part of them still doesn't leave when they're in a discussion or an argument. They are a big fan of like, don't ask, don't tell. If you want to share it with me, I'll listen, but I'm not going to be the one that's like, so how's your day going? Tell me everything about it. Like, that's just not the way that they're hardwired. It doesn't mean they can't learn. So just because you're hardwired a certain way doesn't mean there's no software updates available in your mind. When women are afraid to be disliked socially, it makes sense if you look at historically that kept them in certain social classes. It kept them from being too perfect that they would be shunned or outcast, or the weakest link in the herd, which would also be shunned or outcast in a different direction. You have to be just likable enough to fit in the current social in-group without being too different in either direction to be in a new out-group. And that's the constant tension that we feel. Mix that with Erikson's stages of development and adolescence in your 20s usually is the decade that was usually cited, or previously cited rather, where it's identity versus role confusion. Who am I? Who do I fit in with the world? Who are my friends? Who are my enemies? And women have very different social aggression than men do. And that is true. Oh, that's like the scene in Mean Girls. Oh, that's the cutest skirt ever. She walks away. That's the ugliest skirt I've ever seen. No wonder we're left feeling like, do people like us? Because to our face, people are one way, and behind our back, they're another way. Men don't usually, as far as I've learned and studied in my decades of doing this, they don't usually struggle the same way. If there's a problem, they call them.
Their thought process is so different.
Totally different.
They're not even thinking it to begin with.
No, they're like, they don't like me. Okay.
You say, you're like, oh, I don't like your beard. Oh, okay. And he's like, done.
Yes.
For me, it's like, why didn't she like my beard? Well, why didn't you like my beard? What happened?
Yeah.
Is it too short? Is it too long? Do you think
Did I do something to not? Yeah.
Yeah. And if we don't say that, we're saying it internal. It's like, why didn't she like my, maybe I should do it this way. And then we show up with a different, we color it pink. Like, and it's funny because I look at us playing the role because, the tough girl doesn't talk about it, but it comes out another way. And that's, again, that assertiveness and really being in that space where I know who I am and it's work. And I post on social media. I'm like, do the work, sis.
Yes.
I'm trying to do the work, sis, because your life, it's not that people are going to like you better. Forget that. You're going to love you better. And you're going to just have way more freedom and autonomy in your world that it's just going to be so great. And I mean, it sounds accusatory when you say do the work, sis, but it's not. It's really
an invitation.
It's right. And we are here, when you listen to Talia, this is exactly why her practice and her work exist and some parts of mine, because we want to help you do the work. Because I've been there.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
there are
same.
moments I'm still
Yes.
struggling with.
I'm still doing the work. Yeah, it never ends. Yeah.
Why?
I'm like,
What
oh, I
on
thought
earth did
I
I do
healed.
for them not like me?
I thought I healed. Nope. Still don't love that. I'm dealing with that, with the
Right.
liking piece of it too. It's when you're also not comparing, meaning like judging, I'm better or I'm worse, but like looking next to, kind of like the
Yeah.
juxtaposition of how women internalize or not criticism, and men, because of men's testosterone, they have like 3 to 4 layers, I think is what the research shows, to criticism. It's like, is this even true or not? Do I trust the source? If I do, what would it mean for the relationship if we were to change? And then the fourth question is like, how much energy would it take? So if
Yes.
somebody gave them a criticism, they go through all of that. And that's why sometimes they're like, whatever, because they've done their checklist. But for women, there's no layer, because we have a lot. I mean, unless you have like a hormonal shift of like PCOS, and we're seeing a lot of endocrinology problems because of like childhood trauma. And if you believe in, your biology can be impacted by your upbringing, which I believe it can.
I believe
we're seeing
absolutely.
a lot of like stored anger and what have you goes somewhere. It has to. So it can't. If whatever isn't expressed as repressed or internalized in your somatic self. So unless you have some sort of hormonal shift where this isn't the case, caveat yourself that usually estrogen makes us far more susceptible. This is why in your luteal phase, you're way more sensitive to criticism. You're way angrier. If you're on a phasic schedule, if you're not on birth control or anything, you don't have the same safeguards that I guess men do for criticism. So it goes, and depending on your cycle, especially, it can cut a little bit or cuts immediately deep. And that's why we're more sensitive to it. So you look at biology, evolution, like this is where bringing it all in together.
All together.
When you learn
physics, everything.
this and you can't beat evolution and biology. You can train it, but it's like there's hardwiring. Again, you have to software update.
Yes.
This is all the more reason why I do what I do.
Software update.
You have to learn to have the liking and the at least tolerance, but liking and loving of yourself. So then you can know, oh, I'm luteal right now. I'm going to be far more sensitive to criticism. I know this friend says these things, but means well. So it's not that you have to cut them off entirely, but it's like, I'm going to avoid hanging out with Susie the week I know I'm luteal because she just is a critical person.
And it's going to be triggering to me. And this is why know thyself.
Yes.
So important. And you're never going to know all yourself, but the more that's why I talk about self-awareness, we put in that simple package. And then the self-responsibility. I tell people I don't talk about self-awareness without saying self-responsibility.
Exactly.
Because the self-responsibility piece is to keep going, keep digging, keep learning, keep evolving. And I love that you say being tolerable of yourself. I always use the word being gentle to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my word, because I guess it clicks right away when I say it. I'm like, and be gentle with yourself, meaning be patient, be kind, be tolerant, just be gentle. You don't know what you didn't know what you didn't know. And now you're in awareness.
Yeah.
You do differently. And it's going to take time for you to change those habits that you've been practicing for the last 20, 30, 40, whatever age you're at. So I just love that, because just yesterday, one of my good friends was saying to me, she's like, how do you know? How are you so good at deciphering in your process of maybe meeting and interacting with men that's not going to work, and you're so good and articulate about it? And I was like, well, my process is this comes up really quick, and that equals that doesn't equal that, and it's great. We're not a match. I don't need to have I don't have it. And so she goes, that's almost like a dude. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. It is the way men think. And I don't know. I feel like doing a lot of testing, personality testing, and all these different things throughout journey. I'm always like, I'm always using both sides of my brain, and I'm always balancing. I'm a Libra. So that's the other part. Right. I'm a Libra, right?
Oh my gosh. So am I. I love it.
Exactly. So we're always balanced. Working to balance, bring harmony to the world. Yeah. So it's not, I looked at her and I said, you're absolutely right. I'm pretty sure you are on the money. No one's ever said it that way. That's who I am. And because it makes it easy for me. And I put intentionality and self-awareness. Of course, that became a very easy process. But understand and be gentle with yourself that that's not by default who you are. And you're this loving being who just wants to love and be in love. And that's okay. Now it will come to that other piece of what you talk about, boundaries.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of Mindset Mastery Moments with Dr. Alisa Whyte and Talia Bombola. Be sure to catch part 2, where they continue the conversation on relationship dynamics, boundary setting, and maintaining personal growth while staying true to yourself. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to stay updated with Mindset Mastery Moments, and check out Talia's resources to dive deeper into your journey of confidence and assertiveness. See you in part 2.